Here we go, a college football preview for the Northwestern Wildcats. Unfortunately, they are one of the bottom tier teams in the Big Ten, but let's talk about the star players to begin with. Offensively, Caleb Tiernan, offensive tackle, one of the best in all of college football. I think he's going to be an NFL draft prospect. He's done a phenomenal job at protecting the quarterback in the past. I think that will be no different this upcoming season. So he's a guy, unfortunately, that Northwestern has to look on to be the star power on this offense. Unfortunately, no skill players make this list. Now, quarterback, though, in steps a transfer from SMU, Preston Stone. Now, I'm going to talk about his impact in just a little bit. I think he's going to provide a much-needed relief to an anemic offense for Northwestern. He will be a guy that steps up and does a phenomenal job there with the Wildcats. The schedule may not have his statistics looking great, but he's going to be better than previous quarterbacks at Northwestern, at least in the last 4 or 5 seasons. Now, defensively, Aiden Hubbard is going to be the guy that this team relies on to get to the quarterback for the opposing team. 6 sacks last year. I think he will have an increase in production. Overall, though, this Northwestern defense has, honestly, they don't have a lot of guys that can get to the passer, and this is the guy to do it. Aiden Hubbard is going to be the highlight reel for the Wildcats, in my opinion. He doesn't have like a great finesse game, but he does know how to get around the edge and put some pressure on a quarterback, especially in some of these lower tier games. So those are the stars to look out for. First storyline that I want to talk about, David Braun in his legacy. Now, just 2 years ago, Pat Fitzgerald was fired amid a slew of hazing allegations. Braun stepped in. He was able to pick up the pieces with Fitzgerald's team. They went 8-5, which I thought was extremely surprising. All of the turmoil there was almost insurmountable, and they ended up having a winning season. Now, last year did not go so well. I believe they finished 3-9, maybe 2-10. Actually, I can double check that real quick. Give me one moment. Actually, they finished 4-8, but still a disappointing season to say the least. Northwestern was on the up and up with Pat Fitzgerald as their head coach. It's unfortunate that they had to lose him in the fashion that they did, but Braun's legacy now kind of lies on the table this upcoming year. Can Northwestern get the job done? Can they win all of their non-conference games? And then can they win a couple conference games and maybe get to a bowl game? It's definitely in the cards, in my opinion, but the schedule, once again, is brutal, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. So moving on, let's talk about the losses and additions for this team. On the losses side of things, Josh Thompson, I believe he was the #1 transfer portal interior offensive lineman. He moves on to LSU. He'll be getting a starting job there and probably competing for the playoffs. So great move on his part. Northwestern didn't have any significant guys in the draft, and so that's really all that they lost from last year, outside of some players graduating. Additions, however, they made some impactful additions on the offensive side, which I think is unbelievably important. Griffin Wild, a wide receiver from San Diego State University, last year had 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns. That's the kind of production that you're looking for. You're going to look for a big play guy, and in my opinion, out of anybody else on this roster offensively, Griffin Wild is going to have to be that guy. Is he going to have 1,100 yards? No, but can he have 700 yards and maybe 7 or 8 touchdowns and maybe pull off an upset versus a UCLA or something like that? Absolutely. And so that's the guy that I'm looking for skill position-wise to make an impact out of all the additions that Northwestern made. Then the last one that I want to talk about, I already mentioned him a little bit, Preston Stone. He comes from SMU. Now, a lot of you are very familiar now with Kevin Jennings at SMU. He was the quarterback that took Preston Stone's job early on in the season last year. Nobody really talks about Preston Stone because SMU was not on a national level before last season. However, Preston Stone had a ton of success with the Mustangs in the year prior to last year. 3,000 total, or not 3,000 total yards, 3,000 passing yards, 28 touchdowns in 2023, led SMU to another winning season. And to be honest, he was the guy that was crowned as the next king of SMU, the guy to lead them into the ACC. But I don't know what really happened in those first couple of games, but he did not perform well. Kevin Jennings came in, took the job from him, and he just never looked back. And so Stone, obviously wants to still go and ball out, and so he transfers to Northwestern to get an obvious starting job. I think he'll do a phenomenal job here with Northwestern, at least when you compare him to quarterbacks of the past with the Wildcats. So moving on into the next couple of storylines that I want to talk about. Storyline number one is this is a gauntlet schedule. I just want to go ahead and start at the beginning of the year at Tulane. That is not a game to shy away from. Now, the rest of the non-conference games, they're not great. I think ULM is on there, Western Illinois is on there, but the in-conference games, Oregon, at Illinois, at Penn State. They also have to host Michigan. I mean, when you're Northwestern, they're kind of the Vanderbilt of the Big Ten. They're not a team that is expected to compete at a high level at all during the season, especially in football. This is going to be a year where they're the underdog almost every single game in conference. Now, I do think they end up having a game versus Purdue. We'll get to that in just a little bit. That's a game that they can compete in. So the gauntlet schedule for any team, whether you're Florida or Texas or Alabama, or if you're Northwestern, it's extremely hard. But what makes it even harder is the fact that there's a talent disparity. There's a talent gap. Maybe you could even say a talent canyon in between a Northwestern and a Penn State. It just makes it really hard to carry momentum, build culture, and win games during a Big Ten season like this. So that is something that I want to focus on. This is just a hard path to overcome throughout the year. Northwestern is going to face that this upcoming season. Now, moving on into my second storyline, this offense last year was anemic. They had 7 different games where they scored 20 points or less. God awful offensive production. And where it really factored in was third down. They ranked 123rd in the country in third down conversions. And I put a lot of that on the quarterback play, or better yet, lack thereof quarterback play. Now, Stone could potentially come in and solve that and make some of these games more competitive. I mean, if you look at how Northwestern performed last year, I mean, Wisconsin was a 23-3 game. If they can get some more offensive production there, that's a game that Northwestern can compete in and potentially win. I look at some of these other games like Indiana, 41-24. It could have been a bigger shootout potentially. Indiana, of course, a playoff team. They could have competed with the playoff team is what I'm trying to say. Maybe Preston Stone can solve that issue for them this upcoming year, but there's just so much room to grow in terms of moving from the bottom part of the Big Ten in offensive production to maybe the middle part of it. We'll see if that happens, but that's the key factor that I'm looking at for this Wildcat team up in this upcoming season. Now, moving on into my X Factor game. To me, it's hosting Minnesota at almost the end of the year. At Illinois is the last game. Minnesota is the second to last game. Now, a lot of people are big fans of PJ Fleck and what he's got going on at Minnesota, but to me, this is a prove-it year. And if Minnesota does not have as good of a season as people are predicting, the wheels could be falling off there with the Golden Gophers at the end of the season. And that's a game that Northwestern can capitalize on and win. I look at a team like Purdue from last season. Northwestern, I don't think was on the talent level that Purdue had. That's saying a lot, but later into the year, Purdue, the wheels had fallen off the wagon, and Northwestern was able to go on the road and win that game in overtime. That's kind of the similar storyline that I'm looking at this Minnesota game. PJ Fleck might be on his way out the door, maybe a foot out the door, and Minnesota's entire team could be looking at the transfer portal, especially now that the windows have closed. They could all be looking to get the hell out of there. And Northwestern could rally behind David Braun, become a culture that perpetuates winning potentially, and take advantage of a weakened Minnesota team and win that game. That being said, let's get into the record prediction. I'll go game by game. This is my favorite part of all these all this series that we're doing in all these previews. So let's hop right into it. Game number 1 at Tulane. Now, Tulane loses a ton of talent, especially at the quarterback position. He moves on to, I believe his last name is Mensah. He moves on to Duke. He'll be the starter there. Darian Mensah, I believe, is his name. Anyways, at Tulane. That's a tough game to start the year. Tulane brings in a good amount of players from the transfer portal. That's a team that I don't think that Northwestern is ready for, especially given the fact that Preston Stone has yet to play a game there for the Wildcats. I will give them a loss there, but then they come home, they get a good rebound with Western Illinois. I think that's a very winnable game there. Obviously, they're an FCS team, not ready to compete with an FBS school. Now, would I put it past Northwestern to lose that game? Absolutely not, but I will chalk that up as a win. Then hosting Oregon, UCLA. Back-to-back games, that's tough in my opinion, especially with Oregon. Dante Moore has yet to start a game for the Ducks, but by week 3, I imagine that we will see the training wheels kind of fall off and that Oregon offense take off. You basically saw the exact same thing last year with Dylan Gabriel. And to be honest, I think Dante Moore is a more talented Dylan Gabriel. So Oregon is going to be a big problem for them to handle. I will give them a loss there. And then very similarly to UCLA, they're not as talented as Oregon, but I think Nico Iamaleava is a phenomenal quarterback who is growing into the young NFL prospect that he's going to be. That's a tough game for Northwestern to win, even when they're hosting it. I think that could be a game like Indiana that, Northwestern hosted last year. They kind of kept the game close throughout the 3 quarters, but then by the 4th quarter, the game was pretty much over. That's pretty much what I'm thinking about this UCLA game. I think UCLA will come out with the victory there. So starting off the year, 1-3, they host Louisiana Monroe, who loses, I believe, their number 1 running back to Missouri. He had like 1,600 yards last year. They're going to miss a lot of that production. I don't think Louisiana Monroe is going to be able to compete here on the road versus Northwestern. That's an easy win in my opinion. Then at Penn State, let's just go ahead and chalk it up for what it is. That's a slaughter game. Penn State's going to go in and murder them. They're one of the best teams in the country. They have tons of experience returning. They're very physical. Northwestern is not ready to match that energy. That's a loss. Now, hosting Purdue. They beat Purdue on the road last year, and I think this Northwestern team moving into this season is going to have a stronger home field advantage. The fans might be a little bit more bought in. I think that they win that game versus Purdue. The team is going to rally behind David Braun and get that victory for him. But then a couple of tough road games at Nebraska, who I think will be a much elevated team. Dylan Raiola, their quarterback, is going to have a breakout season. I think I've already mentioned this on Instagram in a reel. I think he's poised for an absolute phenomenal year, and that's going to be a game where he kind of tears up Northwestern. Now, Lincoln Riley, this, once again, similar to Minnesota, this could be a game where Lincoln Riley's got a foot out the door for USC. But the reason that I give this a loss or give this loss to Northwestern is because it's on the road. If it was at home, I would kind of chalk it up similarly to that Minnesota game in the sense that maybe the wheels have fallen off and there's potential to take advantage of a weakened team who's got their eyes on the transfer portal. But for now, I will give Northwestern the loss on the road to USC. So let's see here. Now we are 3-4, 5, 6. 3-6 moving into the last part of the season. Last 3 games of the year, Michigan and Minnesota at home. Now, I talked about this scenario where PJ Fleck in Minnesota could be kind of on the fritz, maybe moving on from each other, but I don't think that that will happen. That's just a scenario that I'm kind of playing up in my head or maybe playing up in your head. But overall, I think Minnesota will have a solid season. That's not something that I view as more probable. I think that the Golden Gophers will be able to come in and handle business, and very similar to Michigan as well. That's a team that could potentially have the wheels fall off the wagon at the end of the year if the quarterback situation does not work out with Underwood. Maybe the scandal with the cheating stuff leads to more discombobulation and a lack of consistency, and this stuff kind of goes back and forth where Michigan is just not set, but I do believe that they are a college football playoff contender, a contender for the Big Ten title. So back-to-back losses there. And then, of course, at Illinois to close out the year. A lot of people don't think about this, but I think Illinois is a playoff contender. Even if they are not such at the end of the season, they're a much better team than Northwestern, especially when Illinois is the team at home. This is a great rivalry game, but I don't see it as like an Iron Bowl type thing where anything can happen. So once again, one more loss there for Northwestern to close out the year. I think David Braun's job is in question. I don't necessarily know that Northwestern is willing to like make radical change, but it definitely could at the end of the season, especially if they close out the year with 5 consecutive losses. So my record prediction right now is 3-9 for Northwestern. That could definitely turn into 4-8 or maybe even 5-7, but I think a bowl game is pretty much out of the question. So that's going to do it for my Northwestern college football prediction. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll see how the Wildcats do, but thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.